Hello, everyone. My name is Reka Bott, and I'm the Chief Program Officer at the Washington State Charter Schools Association. I welcome you today with both a sense of grief and gratitude. I grieve for the recent loss of a man named George Floyd's life, and for the even more recent loss of a man named David McAtee's life, and for the loss of countless other Black lives in our country. I grieve because the institutions that our country has built and sustained have enabled the loss of those lives, and that includes our schools. For as long as we can predict outcomes based on race, we must examine and re-examine our measures, mindsets, and practices. I also want to express gratitude to the people that have taken action against racial injustice. Gratitude to the co-hosts of today's webinar, the Puget Sound Educational Service District, and the Center on Reinventing Public Education. To the 3 mission-driven systems leaders that you will hear from in just a bit, and to each of you for logging in and joining us in what we believe is an urgent conversation. As we look towards the fall and the challenge of designing for multiple back-to-school scenarios, we have an obligation to seize the opportunity that lies within the challenge. That is the opportunity to build a new and different and racially just school system, because we know that the current one was not designed to serve all kids. If we as education leaders don't work now to increase our schools' capacities, to accelerate and personalize learning for all students, especially our most marginalized, then we will be forced to make heartbreaking triage decisions about which students can be caught up and which are too far behind. And too often and for too long, these decisions fall along the lines of race. So even though we don't yet know what all of the solutions are, research has told us a lot about what works and what doesn't. And that's why we need our top education leaders, and that includes teachers, collaborating now around intentional, accessible, and equitable ways to reshape teaching and learning. And that's what our conversation is about today. And so while attendees will be muted, we encourage you to send your questions, comments, concerns, good ideas to us using the Q&A function, and we'll try to address them in writing or during the Q&A portion. We'll also be sharing a recording of this presentation in the next couple of days. We are here to share and learn and evolve together because we must do better. Today's agenda will begin with Georgia Hayward from the Center of Reinventing Public Education, walking us through research about what districts have done across the nation to date in terms of providing instruction this spring, and research-based practices that are critical to consider as we look to the fall. Then we'll hear from 3 Washington leaders from school systems of vastly differing scales and that serve different student populations about what they've learned from delivering instruction this spring and how they're planning for the fall. And finally, we'll close with a Q&A led by Julie Rowling from the Puget Sound Educational Service District. Thank you again for being here. I'll now turn it over to Georgia.
Thank you, Reka. My name is Georgia Hayward. I'm a researcher at CRPE, the Center on Reinventing Public Education. We're affiliated with the University of Washington, Bothell. Since March, CRPE has been tracking district and charter management organization responses to distance learning. This includes a database of 100 systems, as well as a representative sample database that will come out this week. We have been looking at spring distance learning plans and are now pivoting toward looking at how districts are addressing summer learning and fall planning. Next. We have identified some common gaps in spring distance learning. First, systems were slow to respond. At the end of March, only 5% had a comprehensive plan in place. By the beginning of May, that was up to 60%, but it means that for 6 weeks, some students did not have access to quality learning, and some students never did. Even in the most comprehensive of plans, we noticed gaps. While feedback and teacher check-ins were fairly common, only 30% of districts tracked attendance, and only about half of all of those graded students, and that includes things like offering incompletes or offering do no harm grades. Tech access was uneven. Even though the majority of districts gave devices to some students, only half made sure that every single student who needed one had a device. And even though many districts were using online platforms for distance learning, only 15% ensured that all students had internet through community or device-enabled hotspots. Next. So we also have started to look at learning, how systems are addressing learning loss. In the summer, we're seeing about 60% of plans posted so far, and in the fall, where there's only a handful that are talking about how they're going to address learning loss in the spring and how they plan to address historic achievement gaps. So we feel like this is a great time for us to come together and learn together because there is no template. Next. So what are some of the challenges that schools will face? Since there is no template, we can look to research. We know that oftentimes in the spring is taken up with review and test prep. I have heard some people say, well, maybe, we're exaggerating this. How different is it than what typically happens in the spring? We believe that it is different and that systems need to be attending to learning loss, and again, especially to historic achievement gaps. Based on a preliminary analysis, NWEA projects that when students return in the fall, they may have learned only 40 to 70% of the year's content, with math being the most impacted. Beginner readers and those who have been struggling academically will be the most impacted by learning loss in the spring, because even when that time is used for review, these students need that time to review and to practice skills. Students who face traumatic situations suffer academically, and they need more social emotional supports in order to learn effectively. There's a lot of research to support that. And while I do not have the research yet, there is no doubt in my mind that we are going to see a widening of gaps. Families of color and families in poverty have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. Support for students with disabilities was not comprehensive in many of the spring distance learning plans. We anticipate those gaps will grow as well. Next. But research does provide some guidance for what to do next. This first bucket focuses specifically on remote learning. We know from looking at remote learning research that teaching quality is really important. It's even more important than how learning is delivered. Students can work effectively independently, but they need to know how to do that. Peer-to-peer interactions are very motivating in a remote learning environment. But teachers need to know how to support and coach students to learn independently and how to plan lessons that include peer-to-peer interactions. Teachers need data and they need time for collaboration. Teachers need to know what their students missed in the spring and where they are. And teachers need time to work in grade level and content teams to understand student needs and adjust teaching. Again, there is no template. Teachers need time to work together to figure this out. Next. There is also some guidance from the research around learning loss. Students need, researchers are saying that schools should start the year at grade level and incorporate formative learning assessments that are typically part of the curriculum and add even more in, so that then teachers have a good idea of exactly what students are missing and they can design and deliver appropriate review. The research is very clear that tutoring works well to help students catch up. And so I wanted to provide a little bit of what we know about that. Tutoring doesn't need to be one-on-one to be effective. It can be 2-to-1 or in small groups. It does need to be frequent, also called high dosage, and for a sustained period of time. A structured, high quality program is very important for tutoring to be effective, and it needs to include not just training, but ongoing coaching. Programs that have used tutoring, districts that have implemented tutoring programs typically use recent college graduates. They do pay them, but oftentimes at a lower salary, like an AmeriCorps-like salary. And I say that because this tutoring can be very expensive, but there are ways to make it work. It can also be done through virtual or partners like libraries. Next. From our analysis of district learning in the spring and from talking to practitioners, we believe that is very important for districts to set a high bar across all schools in order to address gaps in access to quality learning across schools and within schools. Schools need common diagnostic and assessment platforms so that schools and teachers do not need to reinvent the wheel. There need to be common expectations around attendance, check-ins, feedback, grading, especially trauma-informed supports, whether in the fall we're remote or not. Families need support. Families were really left at sea, and many systems across the country were not given the help that they needed to support their child's education. And again, this is whether we return to remote learning or distance learning in the fall, or families simply want to support their child when they return to school. Next. So now I want to turn to OSPI's guidance. They have published 6 principles that school leaders should consider when thinking about the fall: keeping students at the center, design learning for equity and access, assessing and checking student learning, making adjustments, engaging families. If these sound familiar, it's because these 6 principles are firmly grounded in our understanding of the research. OSPI has also provided some information around scheduling and opening. And while we still don't know what this is all going to look like, those 6 principles grounded in research are there to guide system leaders no matter what learning physically looks like in the fall. Next. So now we're going to turn to our speakers from Bellevue, White River, and Impact, who are going to share how they're thinking about the fall. So again, we can all learn together and seize this opportunity to not only address learning loss from the spring, but to rethink how we approach education to address those achievement and outcome gaps that have long plagued our education system. Now I turn it over to Ivan.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Ivan Duran, and I am the proud superintendent of Bellevue School District. I'm really grateful for the opportunity that I have today to share with you some of the learning that we've experienced over the last few weeks, and also share with you some of the thinking that we have moving forward into the fall. I also just want to acknowledge, I really appreciate what was said to share at the very beginning, that we are in really difficult times right now, and it's very challenging for many individuals. And I just really encourage everyone to just think about what you can do to make a difference in addressing racism, and to move from being an ally to being a co-conspirator. To me, what that means is actually taking action to do something. And my own personal life, really thinking about how I can leverage and put my own privilege on the line to really address the issues around the racial injustice that we're seeing, and to address issues of racial inequities. So thank you. Next slide. So when we closed on March 12th, we had a number of priorities that we really wanted to key on, but most importantly, we really wanted to go back to our vision and our mission and overall values work that really emphasized the need for us to ensure that we are leading for equity and access. So we really focused on ensuring that we had strong plans to meet the basic needs. And then we really pivoted to ensure that our learning was focusing on supporting all of our students, especially our students who are experiencing poverty, our special education students, and our multi-language learners. We also wanted to really think about how we could provide meaningful learning experiences for all of our students that would really prepare them for the next level. There's going to be a link for you to be able to see our resources online at bsd405.org, and you can go ahead and follow from there. So some of the lessons that we learned from the spring, I think there's been quite a few, and I think we're still in the process of learning what those are. But again, really thinking about the equity and access was something that I think we anticipated, but we didn't really have enough in place, and we really had to respond quickly in some of these areas. But many of our families just did not have the adequate access and support, for both broadband internet and technology devices. And so we distributed over 3,000 laptops and over 500 hotspots. And throughout this time, we really ensured to make sure we have some really good tech support, following all the physical distancing guidelines, and ensuring that we are supporting our students and families the best way possible. We also wanted to really think about how we could better meet the needs of our students from the social and emotional perspective. That's one of the big learnings and lessons that we learned during this time, around that both our students and staff really needed more support for the areas of well-being. And I'll share a little bit more around how we learned on that in a couple of minutes. And then finally, we learned a great deal around how we could better utilize our staff, especially our classified staff and hourly staff, to really support our students. And one example is our senior support plan. We currently have 100 classified staff that are working around the clock to ensure that all of our seniors graduate, ensure that they're meeting their graduate success plans, working on incompletes, trying to push the grades up as best as possible. But we really reorganized that system, and it really has impressed me the way that we've been able to respond and support our seniors during this difficult time. Next slide. So other lessons that we learned was just the whole conversation around assessment and grading. I know around in this Puget Sound area, we have a number of districts that had already moved towards standards-based grading, but this was something that we had to have quite a few conversations, and I really wish we would have had more information about this up front, really been thinking about it, because grading is something that even before we went into closure had a variability of practices, and there was a lot of bias involved in grading. And so we really needed to be a little bit more ahead of the game. It's still something that we need to be thinking about. I also would just say that communication, you can never communicate enough. So really think that communicating frequently in small chunks and really thinking about different formats. This last week, I've been sending out weekly superintendent messages, and this last week I actually did a video message, and it was received so well by our community because we were able to add the translation in ways that we hadn't been able to do before. And so we're going to continue to try to do some of the videos, but just find that different formats and using our social media is really important. The other thing that I think is so critical is this, the way that we have surveyed our stakeholders. Every 3 weeks, we have sent out a survey to our students, our staff, and our community to really focus initially on the well-being. So going back to what I mentioned earlier, we really wanted to know from students just how they were doing, how they were feeling, how our educators feeling, how was our community feeling. And there's just a little brief part, I know it's difficult to see, but some of the things that we learned is that there were a significant number of our students that were experiencing sense of feeling lonely, a sense of feeling lost, and so we were able to get that information early on during this time and do some immediate work to address that by sharing this with our school leaders, sharing this with our educators, and we were able to be responsive in a way that I really was proud of the work that we did to really try to provide more supports to our students in this area. Next slide. So we are in the process right now of planning for the fall, and one of our first steps in the process is that we engage a group of stakeholders to go through a rapid design process. One of the resources that I share with you at the end is a rapid design process that we utilize that really focuses on equity. So going back to our vision and our mission and what we really believe, we wanted to make sure that we were having equity as the front of our conversation. So we gather some of our school leaders, some of our educators, some of our nursing staff and district leaders just to spend a day going through some rapid design process, thinking about these 4 areas. So in the first, in remote learning, you're just really thinking about what do we need to rethink around what we're going to be doing with remote learning and what can we do to make it better. We know we have to add some more time at the high school level for our schedule. We also know we need to think differently around our P through 2 experience for our younger students, and we need to really think about the small group instruction. The reentry really applied to all of them. We really wanted to think about and utilize this group's thinking to really come up with what were some of the things that we did during this time that were really impactful and meaningful, like how we were able to reuse and think about our staff in a different way. And so that reentry was really designed to think about how can we think about the best practices and apply them to all the different elements. The physical distancing scenario is where we are thinking about basically where we're going to need to have some kind of hybrid. We're anticipating that we will need to have some of our students, following the physical distance guidelines that we, are hearing and reading about, and then also think about still having some kind of remote learning experience. We know that we will have to have a hybrid in this model. And then finally, one of our groups spent time thinking about, we know that there's a really strong possibility that we could have a resurgence of COVID-19 next year. And so how can we be better and more responsive to the need to close our schools if that did happen? And so we gathered all this information and took this and started building out some straw designs and really just thinking about some of the work that we're going to need to be doing next. Next slide. So as we think about planning for the fall, there's some things that we are really considering, taking the OSPI principles that they have already provided to us for things for us to consider. And, top of mind is going to be ensuring safety of all of our students, staff, and families. The Friday before we chose to close our district, we had about 20% of our staff that was absent, and none of them were absent because they were either feeling sick, had symptoms, or were in the vulnerable group. And so we know we're going to have to really think differently around how we're ensuring safety for all of our constituents. I also believe we need to be really focusing in on supporting the social, emotional, and mental, physical impacts of COVID-19. There's a really good resource I added on here from New York University Steinhardt School, and they really emphasize this idea around healing spaces, that there has been so much trauma and experience that when we bring students back, whether it's remote or physical, we have to really think about how we're going to be addressing this area and not take it for granted and ensure that it is part of our plan up front, because just jumping into the academics is not going to work for our students and our educators who have just been experiencing this crisis in many different ways. And then finally, I know that we are still going to have a really strong need for supporting our families and students for just the basic needs. And so we are putting in plans to ensure that we have some of that covered when our students come back. Next slide. When we think about key principle design, principle number 2, design learning for equity and access, I would really just focus on that, we really are keying in on thinking about our most vulnerable and marginalized students and what we can do to ensure that we are supporting them in the best way possible. One of our big next steps is to enlist student, family, and educator voice in the design process, and that's actually some work that we're going to be starting up next week. We plan on doing some surveys, some focus groups, and one of the unique things I think we do in Bellevue really well is that we will be keying in on some affinity group work so that we ensure that we are hearing voices from our most marginalized and vulnerable groups. And then we plan on just utilizing this COVID-19 experience as an opportunity to really think about what we can break and what kind of inequities we can disrupt, everything from grading and trying to shift that in a place where we can think about how we can promote growth, development, and life quality of students, thinking about assessments and eliminating failure as an option. And then finally, really thinking about competency-based practices and just other ways that we can think about moving away from seat time. Next slide. And then on key principle 3, assessing student learning, I really appreciate what Georgia brought into the conversation around some of the research. It's definitely some things that we're going to be thinking about, but we really want to think about how we can elevate academic rigor through innovative instruction. We've seen a number of just amazing things that our educators have done during this time. This morning, I was actually watching one of our culinary teachers teach a class, and she's already figured out how to have 2 cameras, one on the food and one on herself. And I walked away this morning with a new recipe to try in my house. So our educators are doing some amazing work. We want to keep capitalizing on that work in a great way. And then again, back to what Georgia said is that how we can focus the majority of time on grade level standards, content on curriculum, and not go backwards in time. We know that our students have experienced learning loss. We know that's going to be there, but we have to push the rigor. We have to push the expectations for our students so that we ensure that we are meeting them at the next level, which they're going to be coming to us. And then I'll just keep moving on. So next slide, just for some concluding remarks, is that as people are thinking about planning for the fall, I really highly encourage everybody to really think about having equity focus from the very start. Think about how you can bring some kind of design thinking process into it with racial equity as a forefront. And it's one of the resources that I have that you can link to and see that, and some ideas that comes from education first. I also believe that you really need to, collaborate and include stakeholders. We have a big plan to do that, and I think that's going to be ongoing work throughout the summer. And then we also have spent a lot of time, effort, and energy talking with our school board. Our school board really has done a beautiful job of creating a set of commitments that they're going to be adopting actually tonight at the school board meeting that really help to provide us some direction in terms of things that we need to be thinking about for the planning perspective. And then once again, just communicate, communicate, communicate. The big question I've been really thinking about is, everybody keeps talking about we can't come back to what normal was before. And so what are going to be some of the big innovation and shifts that we want to do? And I think about my role as a systems leader is like, what is really possible and how can I set up the context for this type of work to happen so that we can utilize this time that we have. And then finally, next slide, I just did put down some resources that I have just found very useful. They've really helped to put together some of my thoughts and ideas around what we need to be thinking about for the fall. So I encourage everybody to follow those resources. One of them is not out yet from Achieve the Core, but when that is released, it really has given me some ideas. So again, thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to answering questions. And now I'll be turning it over to my colleague, Janelle Keating, who is the superintendent for White River School District. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivan. I want to start by thanking Reka for her opening comments, and also that I will be adding on to the things that Ivan had to say. I'm proud to share the journey we've had in White River. So if we go ahead and put up that first slide. I can't see this. Yeah, I can't see the slide. What I see is thank you questions. Okay, great, thank you. You know what, even without the slide, I'm going to just go ahead and get started talking a little bit about what distance learning looked like for us. So essentially, what I want to share is that our systems that were in place saved us. So when I talk about our systems, I'm talking about our collaborative teams. That White River is a model professional learning community. The collaborative teams, the team leaders really led the way in this work. So that system that was in place made a huge difference. We also had a digital learning platform. So grades 2 through 12 use Google Classroom. They were already rostered in that. They were using Google Classroom every single day. So they were very comfortable using it. Our teachers were comfortable using it as well. Also, that we had a tech levy. And so by the end of the day on March 13th, when we was our final day of school, every student grades 2 through 12 took a Chromebook home with them. And so we're super thankful for that tech levy. With the tech levy, for years and years, our teachers in White River have annually had 7.5 hours of tech training. That's part of their contract. So it helped them become very familiar with tools that we were going to be using, like Flipgrid and Screencastify. They were using some of those tools already. So super proud of that system that was in place. Not sure if you were able to find the slides. Okay, so let's back up one slide, please. Also, that for each of our grade level and content area teams, there are unit plans in place. There's a Google House or a Google site that they go to, and where they're going to see the essential standards, the learning targets, the formative assessments. So essentially, every third grade teacher was working on the same standard in ELA or math when we exited on March 13th. So all of those pieces helped us frame that conversation of the team by saying, now, okay, we know what's essential, we know what targets we're working on. What is this going to look like in this distance learning environment? Okay, go ahead to the next slide. Also, by the end of the day on March 13th, we were able to assess our technology inventory, deploy devices. We had already surveyed home and teacher access to the internet. We knew exactly the number of hotspots we needed and had those on order. And we also, as a district, really selected and focused on a number of the tech tools that our teachers would be using. And all the training, all of the support was going to center on those specific tools. whether it was Zoom, again, Flipgrid, Screencastify, and oh, by the way, really using your document camera. Those things went home with our teachers as well. Let's go to the next slide, please. So when we look toward fall, let's back up one slide. When we look toward fall, oh, okay, keep going. We really want to be able to lead with the social emotional learning. Many folks are familiar with the 4 critical questions of learning. They're at the heart of a professional learning community. But Dr. Doug Reeves said, you know what, it's time to add question 0. Before we ever get started on focusing on the academics, the essential standards, how about if we talk about what do you need to help you learn right now? What does your family need? So that's a piece that we will be, as well as what Ivan said, focusing on in the fall. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So fall of 2020, what we're thinking about right now, a lot of our time and energy is really going down and revisiting those essential standards by grade level and course. We're going to take a look at, it's going to be ever so important that this vertical team conversation is happening, so that if I'm teaching 3rd grade, I'm going to want to know, what did kids have to do with that essential standard in 2nd grade? And you know what, how about if I do a quick formative check for understanding to see where they are? And before I launch teaching, we might need to give a little additional time and support here, marinate them in those prerequisite skills. So a lot of our conversation is based around that, unit by unit, standard by standard. Let's go to the next slide. And so when we're talking about those quick formative checks, they can happen in lots of different ways, but if you're teaching 3rd grade, you don't even have to make a quick formative check. Just talk to your 2nd grade teachers. They have a lot of those formative checks. For us personally, in White River, they are likely in our technology site where you can just go grab them. So something that gives you a little bit of information about your kids before you get going. Okay, next slide. So let's take a look at this. This happens to be, I'm just going to give you some examples of the work that's going on right now. So this is 3rd grade, this is unit 1, and this is the first standard that they're going to be focusing on for 3rd grade, and that's an exiting standard. So they're going to work on it a variety of times throughout the year. Right next to it, we want those teachers to know what happened in 2nd grade related to this standard. What did kids have to be able to do? And then, you know what? There's a proficiency scale. We want to talk about, what does it look like to be a level 3? What does it look like to be a level 2? How do we want to communicate these expectations to students and parents, and likely lead us to the knowledge of if students have met the standard? So let's take a look at one of those proficiency scales. So you're going to see this is a proficiency scale. Actually, this is a grade 2 one, and you're going to see right there what it looks like to earn a 4, a 3, a 2. The 1 piece is cut off here, but there's just specific information that we want our teachers and our teams to have. This information being communicated to families, this information being used with our students. Let's go to the next slide. Also, you're going to see just an example of quick end of unit assessments. We're having lots of conversation right now about what those end of unit assessments would look like. We're doing a good job with the formative checks along the way, giving us information about our kids to drive our instructional moves, but taking a look at what these end of unit assessments will look like if we're back in that virtual environment. In White River, we have a 90% reading goal for kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2, and we will be deploying it's measured 3 ways. We have figured out 1 way to measure that and are collecting data on that 90% reading goal right now. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So there's been a lot of conversations in Washington State. I've been on part of the Reopening Schools Task Force, the Grading and Reporting Task Force, lots of different things. And folks want to jump right to standards-based grading. And we want to remind you that before you can do standards-based grading, you have to have clear priority or essential standards. That comes first. And knowing what standards are priorities and what standards are supporting. You need to have some sort of assessment process along the way where that's aligned to those essential standards. And also those rubrics, your proficiency scales, or your success criteria needs to be in place. And also that kids are going to need multiple opportunities to demonstrate. If you're doing these things, you're actually doing standards-based grading. It's actually a verb. Okay, let's go ahead to the next slide. And I want to just close with a quote from Dr. Rick DeFore. And this is part of my thinking every single day. And this comes from his book, In Praise of American Educators, where he says, will you act with a sense of urgency as if the very lives of your students depend on your action? Because in a very literal sense, more so now than any other time in American history, they do. And so every single day, working to put the pieces in place that our kids will need, whether we're going to be back in continuous learning 2.0, a hybrid model of some sort, or back in the classroom. So again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to share.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abby Sedano. I'm the Chief Academic Officer for Impact Public Schools. We're currently kindergarten through second grade school in Tequila, Washington. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm excited to talk to you about where we at Impact Public Schools have been, what we've been doing this spring, and what we plan to be doing this fall. Next slide. The Impact Public Schools brick and mortar model has 4 key components: social emotional learning, individualized instruction, decolonized project-based learning, and a culture of positivity. We've worked with our families through a design process to ensure our remote learning model also includes these key components, as we feel they're each necessary for a well-rounded elementary education. We have done this by thoughtfully blending whole class, small group, and one-on-one learning time to include a combination of asynchronous and synchronous activities that are led by the teacher. We've developed an elementary-friendly system that allows our youngest scholars to navigate the schedule with independence so that parents can focus on being supporters and cheerleaders, but not be asked to be the main teachers. We're currently a K-2 school, so we've had the time and space to focus on what works best for our youngest scholars. As you can see on this slide, we've created a Google site that allows our youngest scholars to independently navigate through the day using visuals. Each scholar is assigned to an animal group. This allows us to continue to use a station rotation model so that every scholar gets plenty of personalized time with the teacher. For instance, if you're in the fish group, at 9:30, your teacher would say, click on the yellow fish, and this would take you directly to your Zoom small group with the teacher. And then at 10 o'clock, your teacher would say, click on the red fish, and this would take you to your online Lexia platform for independent literacy work. To facilitate these transitions, we also use an app called radio.co. You may wonder, how do our youngest kids know when it's time to come back to recess, from recess, or time to switch to the next group? We worried about losing our youngest kids throughout the day. Radio.co is a radio station that plays silence most of the day, but when we want, plays announcements from our school leader to welcome kids in the morning and to tell them when it's 2 more minutes until it's time to come back from recess or time to come back into the classroom. While our spring plan is incredibly robust, even for our youngest kids, we know that it can't be one size fits all. Our spring plan is a structured day for most, but has flexible options for families who need it. Next slide. Here is an overview of our daily schedule. This is our Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday schedule. As you can see, it's very robust. We've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on it. And I will say that Wednesdays and Fridays are half days to allow time for teacher PD and some really needed family time that's been a silver lining of this pandemic. Next slide. The number one piece of feedback we've heard from families as we were designing our spring model is that they needed structure. They needed structure for their youngest kids at home. 94% of our families have been able to attend our structured plan. The remaining 6% have opted into a more flexible option. Of those 94%, we've had an average of 92% average daily attendance which was quite a bit higher than we first expected. We think that the family-centered design process and a highly engaging computer classroom has led to this strong attendance. Our second key learning is that the same classroom management practices we use in setting clear expectations, narrating the positive, infusing the day with celebration and joy, and thoughtfully following up with families has worked beautifully in the computer classroom. We've spent about 20 hours training teachers in classroom culture, collaboration strategies, and tech skills to ensure that our remote classrooms are just as strong as our brick and mortar classrooms. Our third learning is directly from feedback sessions with families that we've been doing this spring. While families love the structured day, the much needed structure, our current schedule involves too many transitions for our youngest scholars, mostly our kindergartners. Families have suggested that we group our synchronous learning activities and our asynchronous learning activities together in the day to reduce transitions, and that's feedback we're thinking about for the fall. Next slide. So here's an overview of some of the things we're thinking about for our fall plan. As we prepare for the fall, we're taking much of what we've learned from spring, our feedback sessions with families, and really prioritizing physical and emotional safety for students, as well as ensuring that we're still meeting mission by providing rigorous academics even for our youngest kids. Our fall plan continues to include our 4 key model components: SEL, individualized instruction, PBL, and a culture of positivity. This fall, we plan to loop classes and teachers, which is something we don't normally do, but we think in this moment it will provide consistency going into a year that promises to bring new challenges. This will also allow teachers to have the knowledge they need to move forward with grade level content while scaffolding for what students have missed and really knowing their kids to know how to push them forward most effectively. We have developed a list of key synchronous and asynchronous components that we're going to use throughout the year despite the format of instruction. These components can work in remote learning, a hybrid model, or a full brick and mortar model. We expect there to be potential model shifts throughout the year, and we think it's really important that students have a fluid instructional experience and we're not switching the type of learning they're doing if we have to switch the mode of instruction. Finally, we know families are going to have different comfort levels coming back to school. We plan to offer 2 options to families so that all families feel like they can deeply engage despite their comfort level. Next slide. One option we plan to offer is a full remote model. This combines SEL, PBL, and rigorous academics. In this model, given the parent feedback, we're planning to split our kids into an AM group and a PM group to increase our student-teacher ratio. Students will complete synchronous learning during one part of the day in a structured schedule with the teacher, and complete asynchronous learning on a more flexible schedule with their family during another part of the day. Next slide. The other option that we are planning for is our hybrid option. We are waiting to hear from the state on specific guidance, but tentatively we plan to have students split into 2 groups, with some students attending Monday, Wednesday, and every other Friday, and other students attending Tuesday, Thursday, and every other Friday. In this model, students will complete the synchronous components like they did in the AM or PM in the virtual model while they're at school, and the asynchronous components on the days when they're not at school. So we can have those same components that we did in the other model, but have them delivered in person, the synchronous components, and the asynchronous components on their days when they're not at school. As you can see in all of our models, SEL starts the day. Helping our youngest students feel connected and valued with their classmates and with their teachers is our top priority, especially during this challenging time. Next slide. In thinking about OSPI's guidance and principles, one that has really been important to us is designing for equity and access. Impact Public Schools is diverse by design. We work hard in every decision to make sure that equity is at the forefront. Equity and access are at the forefront. The first thing we did when schools closed, when we knew schools were closing, was provide and train on tech. We made sure every student had access to high quality technology and internet. And then we had teachers do one-on-one check-ins with families twice a week to offer support on that technology and make sure they had what they needed for access. These one-on-one check-ins also allowed us to make sure families had what they needed in terms of basic needs, and then to follow up with support. We are proud to serve a large population of multilingual students and families. We are providing family training on remote learning in multiple languages and multiple formats so our families can support their students. This includes frequent communication through videos and audio recordings so that families, no matter what their barriers are, can have videos in their language that help them know how to support their kids. This also includes dress rehearsals so that families and kids can practice what the remote learning is going to look like before they're asked to do it. It also includes a help desk where families can click and get help over the phone or over video conferencing anytime they need it so they don't feel stuck. Another thing that's really critical during this time is giving options. We know that life is full of challenges for families right now. We want to give families multiple ways to fully engage to ensure there's an option that works for every student. The best way we can provide equity, though, is to ensure all students have access to great instruction, both social, emotional, and small group academics. While remote learning is challenging with our youngest kids, the work is worth it. We know our K-2 kids are our early readers, and they cannot miss that instruction. That reading time is really critical. We need them to fully engage in their learning. We need this robust instruction to ensure that the opportunity gap doesn't widen with our youngest students. Finally, all of our systems have made sure that all special ed services are provided virtually. This has been complicated to schedule and figure out, but we've shifted resources to have dedicated people to scheduling this so that our kids don't miss out on their services. Next slide. Some final thoughts. My final thought for you is don't underestimate our youngest students. They can do it. We've been shocked by them. They've been independent and flexible and brilliant, and it's really critical that all schools have robust K-2 plans. We know that we've had the advantage of being able to think about only K-2, and so we're happy to help. If there's anything we can share or partner about, we're eager to do that. We're really invested in the K-2 world. We also know that new challenges are going to come up, and we'd love to learn from you. So please don't hesitate to visit our website if you have any questions or want to partner. We'd love to partner with you to make sure that we're sharing all of our resources. I'm now going to turn it over to Julie from the PSESD, who's going to lead us through questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Abby, and thank you to all the panelists. We're going to move into Q&A, this portion of our agenda. And again, my name is Julie Rowling, Executive Director for the Puget Sound Educational Service District. And at PSESD, we have a clear focus on leading with racial equity and are deeply committed to supporting racially just and humanizing school systems. So thinking about humanizing school systems and that key principle of keeping students at the center, I'd love for all the panelists to address how you have centered student voices in your planning efforts. And we'll start with Ivan.
Greetings, everyone. Yeah, so we definitely are planning on including our student voices. You know, I think one of the things that we did from the very beginning, I mentioned with our survey, just taking the time to survey our students and find out how they're doing has been really, really important for us. And so that is something that we have done during this time that we will continue. We have some, straw designs that we've created based on the 4 scenarios that I shared with you earlier. And so our next step is to do some stakeholder engagement. So we definitely plan on including our students in the conversation, including their input, and really trying to figure out exactly, what worked for our students, what didn't work for our students. We have a lot of information already, but I feel we can gather more information. And especially as we start thinking about, moving into the fall and sharing some of the ideas that we're thinking about. Many times in Bellevue, after we have had some type of incident or challenge or issue, we do what we call an after-action review, and it just gives that opportunity to really do some reflection. So we'll bring in some of that in, and we are hoping that we can get some of this started as early as next week. So we will use some surveys, we will use some panels, and we will also key in specifically on some affinity groups to make sure that we are hearing from all of our students, our families, and our community. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Janelle, what about you?
Well, what we actually just started yesterday. We launched a survey that is giving us information for fall. So that survey went out to our parents, our students, and our staff. And like Ivan, we want to see what worked for them. We want to see, what technology tools worked, what daily routine worked, etc. So we're really looking forward to getting that information. It's going to help give us information on what we'll need as we make decisions about the fall. Also, next week, we will start our student and parent focus groups, where we believe the survey is going to give us a piece of the information, but we want those anecdotal stories from our kids and our families. And so super excited to see that. I'm also looking forward to the data on our early readers and the data on our high school kids. We've had about 90% engagement. So we want to find out from those kids what worked for them, what kept them engaged, and what we need to do more of.
Awesome, thanks. Abby?
Absolutely. I would say three things. Our kids are very young, and so not as survey savvy yet. But we've been having regular weekly town halls for our families to get feedback on specific things we're working on, and also general feedback. We invite families and students to attend those feedback sessions and share their feedback on what's working or not working. And we always follow up to let them know how we're going to incorporate that feedback. We also have been really designing for the student experience by prioritizing positive culture. How do we make the classroom feel connected and joyful, just like the real classroom, to make sure our students feel valued and heard within our classrooms. And then finally, we start each day with mentor time, social emotional learning. During this time, while scholars might not be giving specific feedback on the model, they're asked to do emotional check-ins and share something going on in their lives, so they can share how they're doing, make sure their voice is heard, whether that's sad news from their family or that it's their great-great-aunt's birthday. They're able to really share with the class how they're doing and what's going on in their lives and feel connected that way.
Great, thank you. I'm going to move to one of the questions that just came in the Q&A, a timely question, asking the panelists about the current events. So thinking about what's happening with police brutality and the Black Lives Matter protests, will you all be incorporating this theme into your lesson plans currently and then into the fall?
So Julie, I'll start there. We actually have a principals meeting on Thursday afternoon, which is all around teaching and learning. And that is a topic on the agenda, because as we review our unit plans and our standards, where will we layer this theme in?
Yeah, this is Ivan. And yes, many of our educators and our school leaders have already started incorporating some of the conversations, and many of them have been, as simple as just creating the space for our students and our staff to be able just to share how they're feeling, what they're experiencing, to reflect on, what they've seen, in the news, and to really offer their opinions, their thoughts, and their feelings. So yesterday, one of our educators actually hosted a forum, and we were actually able to sit in and listen to the conversations. And I wish there was an opportunity to be able to actually record, what we heard from our students, because there's so much insightfulness that comes from them, especially our students who are African American or Black, and to hear their experience and what they're feeling. I think it's just incredibly compelling for me as a leader to ensure that we're doing everything that we can support our students. Like Julie, we actually have a principal meeting tomorrow with all of our school-based and central office-based leaders. Part of that process, we also have to allow people to do the same thing, to express their feelings, their opinions, and their thoughts. And so we'll create some space for that, but we definitely are encouraging people to create the space for this to happen and incorporate it in as best way as possible.
Thank you. Abby, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, we are actually holding space today for families to join. We use a circle structure for our social emotional learning curriculum, and we're holding a family circle today for families to share thoughts, feelings, frustrations, ideas, and just have a place for that space to be held. We also have shared a couple of resources with families. One, just how to talk to really young kids about what's going on in the world right now and relationship with police and police brutality, how to talk to young kids about racism. And then two, how to just make sure that our libraries, our bookshelves are celebrating characters of color in non-traumatic ways. Like, how are we making sure that, we have libraries full of books that have a diversity of characters, not just when we're talking about social justice or civil rights. And so we've actually created a book list for families, for all families, that I'm happy to send to anyone, of elementary school books that can really fill your shelves with diverse books that really just celebrate and empower.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to another question that has come in on the Q&A here. How is teacher voice being included in the decision-making process? How are school leaders protecting the emotional well-being of work-life balance for teachers? So wondering if you all can speak to that in terms of teachers' voice and the balance during this time.
I can start on that one. So our team leaders, and then those team leaders make up that school leadership team. And they have really been the backbone for all of the decisions that we're making. Also, we've had district-wide team leader meetings. This Zoom format has really allowed us to connect that way and then send them into their breakout rooms by their grade level teams and really talk about what's working, what their struggles are, share ideas, everything down to what Georgia talked about in the opening today. How are we going to improve teacher quality? So in this learning environment, giving them that chance to connect and talk, and the technology has really helped with that. So I'd say that's one area. Then also I'm really, again, going back to the survey that's focusing on what worked, what were the struggles, that information that will be coming in next week. I'm looking forward to seeing that as well.
Yeah, and I'll just say again, yeah, we've done the survey, so we've been gathering input from our educators and hearing, from them on a regular basis. We also plan on doing the stakeholder engagements next week, and we definitely have our educator voice in there. I had a meeting today with our association president and the vice president. We've been having a lot of conversations, both from not only what we're going to be doing in the fall, but how we're going to be really thinking about how we're shifting some of our work, because the reality is that, I think traditionally in education, we come towards the summer and we start to pull back a little bit, knowing that we need to all take a break. And I definitely feel we need to take a little bit of a break, but we're going to have to bring our educators to the table this summer to be part of these conversations and be part of the planning. So we plan on having them incorporated into all the work. And then I would just say that we have also been really conscious of leading from a place of kindness, compassion, and grace, knowing that our educators have been experiencing many different scenarios, from having their own students at home and then trying to teach courses. I think it was one of the reasons why we did our schedule the way that we did. And it may not have been perfect, but we have said that we have been doing our best job possible. So it's definitely been something that's at our forefront that will continue, because we value our educators and know they are critical. And I think during this time, we have really seen how important the role of education or educators are to our society.
Yeah, I'll just add, same thing. We've been keeping our teachers really in the loop through actually weekly town halls with our teachers on just, what we're thinking, what our planning's looking like for the fall. Want to make sure they're in the know on everything we're doing and having opportunities to give feedback at every step of the way. We've also limited their hours a bit to give them just more time to take for self-care, to take care of themselves, and also more prep time, more collaborative planning time with their peers as they just adjust and learn to this new way of life, more PD time. So really making sure that they have the training that they feel like they need. And then we've invited, if they have kids who don't go to our school, but are the right age, we've invited them to sit in our distance learning classrooms to try to make that home balance work. And also made sure that our teachers were able to come up with a schedule for them during the day that's robust for our kids, but also allows them to take care of their needs at home. So that's just, been some flexibility in how we've thought about teacher scheduling.
Great. We with the time we have left, just a minute or two, I'd just love to have each of you highlight what have been any of the bright spots that you've experienced during this pandemic.
So I think one of the bright spots is just the connection with our parents, really using the parent partnerships that are going on between the child, the student, and the classroom teacher. I think it's given us the opportunity to team at a whole new level. Basically, we had strong school teams, but the cross-district teams, the vertical teamwork is been super impressive, as well as the technology use that's going on across the district has been impressive.
Yeah, and I'll just say that, we have shared values in our district, around service, compassion, equity, respect, excellence, collaboration, and just seeing those being lived out have been bright spots. And I feel like I probably need a whole nother hour to talk about bright spots, but I've just been so impressed by the way so many people in our organization have pivoted and have asked, what can I do to support our students and our families in the best way possible? Our community partners have really stepped up, to provide support in the area of childcare and nutrition and just those basic needs. And so I feel there's just been an incredible response to really supporting our students and families and our community in the best time. And again, just the innovation that I've seen from our educators and our school leaders have just been really impressed, and just really look forward to actually building upon those bright spots and shouting them out a little bit more in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, we've always believed in the limitless potential of 5, 6, and 7-year-olds of our youngest kids, but they have just blown us away. The independence that they've shown, the independence that our families have shown. I think teachers are understanding that there are things that they can ask of their kids when they come back to the brick and mortar model, things that their kids are capable of that they may have underestimated for sure. So that independence, and our teachers just even more not underestimating our youngest kids has definitely been a silver lining.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Ivan, Janelle, and Abby, for sharing your equity-centered instructional practices as we plan for the range of back-to-school scenarios. Thank you to CRPE, to WA Charters, and for all of you for joining us today and learning with us. Our education system as we know it has been disrupted. While it has presented immense challenges for our students, our families, and educators, it is also an unprecedented opportunity to reimagine and transform our systems by leading with racial equity. Thank you all. Have a wonderful rest of your day.